Storm Reed searches for her mother and unearths a terrifying secret in Missing. Hugh Jackman and Laura Dern try to care for their depressed teenage son in The Son. And Kang-soo Young works to create an elite soldier from the memories of her dead mom in Jung-e. All this and more is being released this weekend. Hello guys, I am the Hick Critic here, bringing you my opinions of the films that were just released. As always, keep in mind these are my own personal opinions. Feel free to check out any of the films that seem interesting to you. If you do decide to see any of the films reviewed today, make sure to comment below what you thought of it to possibly have it featured in an upcoming episode. Let's dive right in. The first film tonight is Missing, a film that is a standalone sequel to the 2018 thriller Searching, which was a very good film. And thankfully, this one's actually right about on par with it. The film stars Storm Reed as June, a recently turned 18-year-old whose mother and her new boyfriend, played by Nia Long and Ken Long respectively, go on vacation in Colombia. But when neither of them return home, concern turns to panic, and June seeks to use as many online and technology tools at her disposal to try to find out what happened to them, even if she has to uncover secrets that she was never meant to discover. One of the most obvious things that makes this horror series stand out is that all the events play out solely on computer screens, which is a gimmick that you would think would get really old really quickly, but thankfully, this crew knows how to utilize it to its fullest potential, and making even the most mundane task a lot scarier than they have any right to be. And honestly, given just how pervasive technology has become, this actually doesn't strain credulity in the way that the found footage genre of the 90s and 2000s often did. But of course, a gimmick is merely a gimmick. The real question is whether or not the film is actually well constructed, and my answer is a resounding yes. This is a film with a ton of twists and turns to try to keep you guessing, but it's actually genuinely twisty and thrilling. Legitimately, there were a couple of scenes where my jaw was on the floor. It's pretty rare for a film to actually genuinely surprise me, but this one actually managed to do it a couple of times and managed to do it without feeling cheap. Every reveal felt earned. And speaking of earned, this film actually contains some well-integrated Chekhov's guns. Stuff that got set up early on that ended up playing a big part later on, and I didn't even notice because it was so subtly interwoven into the narrative. That is masterful work. And thankfully the characters are also well written enough that we were actually interested in them and care what happens to them, particularly with the main character June. Storm Reed's performance as her is great. She sells pretty much every single moment and every single emotion, including a wonderful scene where she just breaks down after everything that she's been through that really humanizes the character. Joaquim de Almeida is also really good in the film as the Colombian who helps June. I didn't even know he was going to be in the film for very long, but I am so glad that he sticks around. I don't know what it is, but there's just something so endearing about his character and his performance, and his growing friendship with June just works and helps provide some levity in what's ultimately a pretty dark story. But the one thing that I was really surprised by most of all was just how much I was getting into the mother-daughter relationship. The relationship actually feels like a real mother-daughter relationship, and it's really the heart of the story. The film is contingent on you buying it, and thankfully it works. I wouldn't say this is perfect by any means. There's a couple of moments of over-editing, particularly in the first 5 minutes. There are some implausibilities with regards to the film's big reveal. There are some times where the shots look a little bit too staged. There's a few brief moments where I was able to stay one step ahead of June, which really should not happen with thriller/mysteries. And there's a couple of minor details that I would have liked to have been included, like, yeah, it's a little distracting how June never accidentally types the wrong letter when she's typing or texting before correcting herself. It's one of those little things that you have to pay attention to in order to make the world seem as real and as grounded as possible. But overall, I had a really good time with this film. It's not anything fantastic, but for a modern-day mystery thriller, this one really hits the spot and helps keep you guessing all the way through. I like the characters, I like the story, I like the presentation, and I like the mystery. A film that both teens and adults can enjoy together. Missing gets a full shot. Next up is The Son, a movie that acts as kind of a spiritual sequel of sorts to Florian Zeller's previous film, The Father, which was a fantastic exploration of Alzheimer's and the effect that it had on someone. And The Son seems to be trying to do the same thing with teenage depression, but it backfires spectacularly. The film stars Hugh Jackman as a lawyer with a new wife, played by Vanessa Kirby, and baby boy, but when his troubled son Nicholas from his previous marriage, played by Zen McGrath and Laura Dern respectively, asks if he can move in, Jackman agrees, hoping to be able to care for his son. So, there are a lot of problems with this film, some of which I can't really get into without going into spoilers, but I will say this: if you yourself have ever struggled with depression or had a child that did, you might want to take a look at a full plot synopsis before you check this out. Not that I think you should, because I think it botches those themes so badly that I genuinely could not stand this film. I do not understand how somebody can make something so great for their first film and then manage to botch up this badly. So let's get into the core of what this film's problem is. I didn't care about this family. I didn't care about Hugh Jackman's character. I didn't care about Laura Dern's character. I didn't care about Vanessa Kirby's character. And I certainly didn't care about Zen McGrath's character. And in a film where the whole entire point is for you to feel for these characters and for the situation they're going through, that is a major problem. These never for a second feel like real people. This is not helped by the fact that the actor they got to play Nicholas McGrath either can't act or was given the wrong direction by Zeller, because his performance in this is awful. These characters never make decisions that feels believable to me. The characters are constantly saying the wrong things at the wrong time, get frustrated over the tiniest things, don't pay attention to obvious red flags, are completely lacking in self-awareness, or have to have basic concepts explained to them like they're children. In one really stupid scene, when the father and son are having an argument, the son finally opens up to his dad about what he's been so depressed about and what he's actually feeling instead of just bottling it up. And the father's response is to shout at him so violently that it practically knocks his son over. How am I supposed to root for or sympathize with someone like that? Now, I know some people might say that there are people like this and that it's more realistic for it to be like this. But A, I don't think the film is that self-aware, and B, you still need to make the characters compelling if you're going to make them unlikable, and no attempt was made to do so. In any other film, not caring about the characters would just be annoying and make the film boring, but then when you take into account the tough subject matters that it's trying to tackle, this is borderline unforgivable. Absolutely no attempt is made by either the parents or the film itself to actually try to explore Nicholas's depression. The film tries to make it seem like that they're trying and that they actually care about him, but I just don't believe it. At all. Even structurally, this film is a mess. It honestly feels like there are entire scenes missing. At one point, Jackman and Kirby have a long conversation about this huge fight that they had the night before that we don't get to see, not even a glimpse of it. And I swear, about a third of this movie is characters just staring off into space so that you understand that they're sad, and that's somehow supposed to make this film deep or poetic. And the film's ending might as well just be a middle finger to anyone that was even remotely interested in this story. It was cheap, and it wasn't earned. You can feel the emotional manipulation running through every single scene. This was really, really bad. The son gets an empty shot. Next up is the new Netflix film Jung-E, directed by Yeon Sang-ho, the same guy that directed Train to Busan. I was hoping that maybe this South Korean sci-fi film would be the first Netflix film of the year to impress me, but sadly it did not. Taking place in the far distant future, long after Earth has become uninhabitable due to pollution and climate change, a massive civil war has broken out among the last remaining humans. One of their top soldiers, played by Kim Won-ju, was trying to end the war once and for all on a very dangerous mission, but failed and slipped into a coma. Her brain and consciousness were transferred into that of a robot, and the company that owns her is working to make her the perfect super soldier, one of the scientists being that of her own daughter, played by Kang Soo-yeon. This movie is pretty much exactly what you would expect from a low-budget science fiction straight-to-streaming film. The special effects are pretty subpar, the pacing feels rather sluggish, the world building is really clumsy, often trying to cram in as much unnatural exposition as possible to try to catch the viewer up. And of course, given that this is a South Korean production, they try to work in some social commentary about the evils of big business. Now, granted, some of these films' ideas are interesting, like the idea of transferring your brain to a robot so that your consciousness can continue, with your level of wealth determining whether or not you have bodily autonomy and are owned by the government or a corporation. But they don't really explore these concepts. They're just kind of thrown out there. These concepts aren't even cleverly woven into the plot and characters' motivations in the same way that the social commentary in something like Parasite was. But it feels more like it was forced in there. Maybe if these ideas had time to flourish, like if this was a mini-series or a TV series or maybe a manga or something, maybe this could have worked. But instead, everything just feels rushed or glanced over. And honestly, some parts of this film are just weird. Some of the bizarre character tics and attempts at making funny faces or gesticulating feel really out of place, and they seem like a desperate attempt to try to inject some levity into the film. Now, there are a couple of things that do prevent it from sinking into unwatchable territory. The lead performance from the late Kang Soo-yeon in what would be her final film role is really good, and the performance from Kim Won-ju, for as little material as she has to work with, is also really good. The one time this film actually clicked for me was the scene where the two of them actually managed to have a heart-to-heart conversation, and it worked. It was engaging, and the actresses were good enough to give it some emotional girth. It's just that the rest of the film is just so blandly generic. There's not really anything that intriguing or new about its plot or presentation to try to help it stand out in a crowd, and I was really struggling to stay interested and to pay attention to what was happening. If you need sci-fi background noise, I guess this one would do the trick, but I can't imagine many people are even going to remember that this exists in the next couple of weeks, if they even notice that it's out at all. Jung-yi gets a half-empty shot. Next up is the new horror film, There's Something Wrong with the Children. Yet another horror film that seems to want to get in on the creepy kid subgenre. And despite the film's best efforts into making it work, ultimately I don't think it quite makes it. The setup is about as basic as you could get. A young couple, played by Zach Gilford and Elisha Wainwright, are taking a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods along with their best friends, played by Amanda Crew and Carlos Santos, and their two children, played by Brie Agueza and David Maddle. Then, after a bizarre incident in a cave, the two kids begin acting really strangely, and it seems that, indeed, there is something very wrong with the children. The film is largely pretty straightforward. It's not really filled with a lot of twists and turns, and it's pretty easy to see where everything's heading. But, sometimes even if you know where a story is going, the journey getting to it can still be pretty fun. And there are a few times where the film actually does get to that point. Eventually. The film's first act is pretty sluggish, taking its sweet time trying to develop these characters and not really succeeding very well at it. We do kind of get this subplot about one of the married couples who participated in a foursome and how that wound up putting a strain on their marriage, which is kind of an interesting development, but it doesn't really seem like it was done to build character, but rather to be used for a plot purpose later on in the film. The acting in this is largely okay. I wouldn't say these kids are great actors, but, some of their line deliveries and the way that they look at the camera is actually okay. I wouldn't say unnerving, but, it's not done badly. The film's strongest section by far is its second act, when the kids are basically trying to convince the rest of the adults that one of the adults has gone crazy and is getting more and more erratic and unreasonable. That, I thought, was actually really clever, being more of a psychological threat rather than a physical threat, and that's when the film really had my interest. But then by the film's climax, it just kind of reverts into a what's behind this door horror climax, one that we've seen before, and it's not really that interesting or even that fun here. Maybe it would be more forgivable if it was scary or even mildly haunting, but it's not. It's mostly just a few standard, marginally gory deaths and a few cheap jump scares. The film's atmosphere doesn't exactly do a good job at building up the threat either. It's not that this stuff is done poorly, and I was at least marginally engaged by it, but it's just that it's stuff that's been done before and done better. And I have to say, the ending is pretty weak. It doesn't really resolve anything, it just kind of stops once it hits the 90-minute mark. If you're in the mood for a changeling or creepy kids horror film and you need 90 minutes to pass the time, there are worse ones out there. It's almost passable entertainment, which for some people that might be enough, but I can't in good conscience say that this is worth forking your money over to see it. If it was free on a streaming platform, I'd say maybe, but as a rental, I can't really justify recommending it. There is something wrong with the children by a tiny hair gets a half-empty shot. And our final film tonight is the Australian crime drama Transfusion, a film written and directed by former rugby player Matt Nable, and I have to say, for a feature film debut, this actually isn't that half bad for the most part, but unfortunately as the film progresses, it just gets worse and worse. The film stars Sam Worthington as a former Special Forces operative who is still haunted by the loss of his wife and unborn child after a terrible accident, but keeps pressing onward to be the best dad he can be for his surviving son, played by both Gilbert Bradman and Edward Carmody, who in his teenage years has become something of a juvenile delinquent. Desperately in need of money and afraid that he might have his son taken from him, he turns to the criminal underworld looking to make some quick money, but with every job he does, the more precarious and dangerous his situation gets. Let me say this right from the get-go. The movie has a strong first act. The scenes that act as the backstory to this film are really well done. A lot of information is conveyed without dialogue, the acting's all good, and even the conflict that one of the characters goes through, especially a hard choice that he's forced to make, really make for compelling human drama. And the performances go a long way in making you feel the pain of these characters. But then the movie sadly jumps forward in time, and this is where the film loses me. It's ironic. For a film that's marketed as an action thriller, really, this film is better at being a human drama than an action film. Bizarrely, the crime stuff like the shootouts, the politics of the criminal underworld, were the most boring parts of the entire film. It's not that the action scenes are done terribly, it's just that they don't feel integrated into the narrative, and honestly, they're not that intense. And they wind up taking time away from the relationship between the father and son. Not only that, but even the scenes between the father and son started to lose me the longer the film went on. Maybe because the actor playing the younger kid was actually a stronger performer than the one that played his older self. Honestly, the film scenes that take place in the past could be its own short film and you would get an emotionally satisfying experience, and it has a solid beginning, middle, and ending. But unfortunately, the film is weighted down by the scenes that take place in the present. There is a powerful, big reveal that explains where the main character's pain comes from and how broken the events of the past left him, but unfortunately, its placement in the story does it a disservice. The film by that point was already having a focus problem, trying to juggle so many elements and not doing that good of a job at it, and then you keep adding these flashbacks on top of it, something that keeps jolting you back to the past as you're trying to make sense of the present. It just adds another unnecessary complication, and it gets in the way of the flow of the narrative, and it makes the film much more confusing than it needs to be. The problem's not really the directing. Nable knows how to frame the shots. He knows when to pull back, when to be close up, when to be silent. It's the script that's the problem here. And it doesn't help this film that when you have two distinct parts and one part is clearly done so much better, it makes the other part of the film that much harder to get through. Maybe if someone makes an edit of just the scenes that take place in the past, I'd say watch that instead. But as a whole, this thing just can't stay afloat. Now, I definitely wish Matt Nable good luck in the future because I actually think he's got potential to make a great film someday. And he definitely has an eye for directing, so Nable, if you, for some reason, just so happen to be watching this, keep at it, you'll get there someday. But maybe get someone else to write a script for or with you. Transfusion gets a half-empty shot. And now here's a quick recap of what I thought of the films reviewed for the week of January 20th, 2023. A full shot for missing a thrilling and exciting mystery that keeps you guessing, buoyed by a compelling performance by Storm Reed. The film is currently in wide release. An empty shot for The Son, an emotionally manipulative, incompetent film that thinks that it's a compelling exploration of teenage depression, but more often than not comes across as exploitation. The film has expanded to wide release this weekend. A half-empty shot for Jung-E, a film that has a few interesting ideas sprinkled in here and there, but doesn't really do anything with them. The film is currently available for streaming on Netflix. A barely half-empty shot for There's Something Wrong with the Children, a film that's perfectly fine for what it is and competent enough for a changeling horror film, but it doesn't stand out and ends on kind of a whimper. The film is currently available on VOD. And finally, another half-empty shot for Transfusion, a plotting drama that starts out strong, but winds up so muddled and confused that it collapses on top of itself. The film is currently available for streaming on Stan. So easily, by a wide margin, Missing is the film of the week. The only film not only worth checking out, but one that is worth actively seeking out. And remember, if you want to see my early thoughts of any film that I watch, or to read more of my reviews, make sure to check out my Letterboxd account. The link to that is in the description below. That's it for now. Next time your worst nightmares come alive in the new horror film Fear, and Jennifer Lopez and Josh Duhamel's entire wedding party is taken hostage in Shotgun Wedding. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Have a good day, and I'll see you next weekend.